I will now take the sediment for the Planning Committee by roll call. Following councillors are present: Councillors Alec Allison and John Anderson, Councillor John Bradley, following councillors are present: Councillors Arch Buchanan, Jackie Burns, Margaret Cowie, Peter Craig, Maureen Devlin, Mary Donnelly, Isabel Dorman. We have apologies from Councillor Fiona Dryborough. Councillor Lindsay Hamilton is present. We have apologies from Councillor Ian Harrow, and Councillor Kenny McCreary is attending as a substitute. Councillor Mark Horsham is present. I have apologies from Councillor Anne LeBlond. Is Councillor Hose present? Councillor Martin Lennon.
I'm here.
Councillor Joe Lowe. We have apologies from Councillor Ian McAllen. Following councillors are present: Councillor Dave McLaughlin and Lynn Nayland. Councillor Carol Nugent.
Yes, Stuart.
Thank you. Councillor John Ross. Following councillors are present: Councillor Graham Scott, David Shearer, Bert Thompson, Jim Murtaugh. I've also taken a note of the officers present and pass you back to the chair for today's business. Thank you.
Thank you, Stuart. Do you have any declarations of interest? Your hand up there.
It's John Bradley. I was late getting in because I had difficulty getting in, just to let you know I'm here.
Okay, thank you, John.
Thank you.
Alec, your hands up. Councillor Allison?
Yes, declaring an interest in item 6, business relationship.
Okay, Alec, that's fine, thank you. Can we agree the minutes of the previous meeting on the 5th of October, and that's on pages 5 to 12?
Agreed.
Okay, thank you. Agenda item 3 is application P201684. That's on pages 13 to 22, and I'll ask Stephen to take us through that item. Thank you, Stephen.
Thank you, Chair. The first application for today's committee is for the conversion of a byre to a house with associated external alterations at South Netherburn Farm, which is just to the east side of Netherburn. I'd like to point out early doors that planning consent for a similar development was previously issued in November 2010, and therefore I would suggest that the principle of this application has already been established and accepted by the council. Indeed, consent at this former farmsteading has resulted in the barns and the byres being converted to 3 residential units already, and this application relates to the last byre that is to be converted. Committee will note that in terms of the local plan, there are a number of policies that are applicable, and in particular the site is actually identified as a housing site in terms of the adopted local plan. 8 representations have been received, and the issues raised are summarised in the report, but you will notice that they're primarily about legal aspects in terms of ownership and contested ownership of the access, etc., and suggestions about neighbour notification being inappropriately conducted. I can assure the committee that those parties that need to be notified were notified of the application, and that the issues raised are primarily not planning matters but relate to legal aspects between the various owners, interested parties at South Netherburn. The principle of the application is acceptable, the details are acceptable, there's been no issues raised by any of the consultees about the application, and you'll note that the recommendation is to issue consent subject to conditions. Happy to take any questions that any member has.
Thank you, Stephen. Councillor Craig?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Thanks, Stephen. I see that the application reference P18, this is on page 15, 3.3. The application P20 was withdrawn. P200974 was withdrawn. Was that because of the issues over ownership that was withdrawn, and it's come back again because they've got that sorted?
It was withdrawn, Councillor Craig, at our recommendation because the application had been with us so long, and the representations that were with us, the fact that the applicant had, in their opinion, resolved these matters, it's easier to submit a new application and withdraw the old one, so that everything is starting afresh. There's no historical baggage with it, but again, with this application, a number of similar objections were resubmitted.
Okay, that's fine. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Don't see any other hands, so I'll move the report.
I'll second it, Chair.
Thank you. Agree the report?
Agreed.
Okay, thank you. Agenda item 4, application P201897, and that's on pages 23 to 54. And I'll ask Stephen to take us through that item as well. Thanks, Stephen.
Thank you again, Chair. This application is for a Starbucks coffee shop with drive-through facility at Bothwell Road, just on the outskirts of Uddingston Village Centre. Before I present the report, I'd like to highlight that since publication of the report, further representation has been received from a number of the objectors primarily that have submitted comments to us. They don't raise any new issues of substance that have not already been covered, but I'd like to highlight that a request for a hearing was made. There's suggestions that the application, because of the importance of the recent Conference of Parties 26 in Glasgow, that the application should not be supported by the Council. And there was also suggestions that the way the application was handled was unprofessional, inappropriate and not correct. One thing that was of concern to the members has been, or to the objector, was the delay in the application because it was submitted last year. But there's many reasons for that, including the uplift of applications, which we're all aware of, and the fact that we had to wait for an updated bat survey to be done when they were not hibernating, so that had to take place in May and June this year. And the fact that various aspects, especially in relation to transport, parking and access, etc., were the subject of discussions and clarification between ourselves and the applicant. So to the report, it's for a relatively standardised Starbucks type drive-through facility. There are others already within the council area. And in particular, you'll notice that the site is at the edge of Uddingston Village Centre. It's level, extends to about 7,500 square metres, and nearby there is a Tesco superstore and a petrol filling station. The site itself has a commercial history and lawful use in terms that it was previously used for car sales. The application has generated a significant amount of representation in terms of numbers, and the report does provide a very comprehensive and detailed response to all the aspects that were raised through the representation process. I would highlight a number of supporting representations were also received in favour of it, primarily saying that it is the reuse of previously developed land and that it would be a welcome facility in terms of redeveloping that site. The objections, however, are very comprehensive, and I would highlight that the Uddingston Community Council have objected to the proposal, primarily in road-related matters, congestion, pollution, and the fact that this proposal will result in the loss of 4 mature beech trees in order to accommodate the car park, primarily of the drive-through facility. The report, I believe, provides detailed, comprehensive responses to all the issues raised, including the fact that the trees have to be felled to accommodate the proposal. These trees, unfortunately, are coming to the end of their life. They do have an existing disease, and whilst the council's arboricultural manager was naturally resistant to see any tree felling, he has accepted that there are justifiable reasons for these trees, which are protected by a tree preservation order, can be removed. You will note that there are conditions attached to this report, specifically with regards to tree matters and tree replacement, and these conditions are very comprehensive and onerous on the applicant. I would like to quickly run through the objections and primarily relate to environmental aspects and traffic aspects, pollution, congestion, inappropriate use of the site opposite a conservation area. I would emphasise the site is not within a conservation area itself, and the report does provide a strong reasoned argument in planning terms as to the recommendation, which is to issue consent subject to conditions. Again, I'm more than welcome to take any questions that members may have.
Thank you, Stephen. Any questions for Stephen? Councillor Scott.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to Stephen for his report. I have serious concerns about this one, and I'll give you my reasoning and rationale behind my concerns in relation to this application. One, any of us that have seen drive-throughs in operation know that I have not seen one yet that doesn't have a tailback problem and doesn't have cars filtering out from the premises onto either main roads or otherwise. I know that the ones that are on in retail parks are even causing problems. If there's an overflow and a tailback from this drive-through, it would be onto a main strategic road, Uddingston and Bothwell. So I have major concerns that, and I know there's Arctics use that road. I've got serious concerns that any tailback from queues using the drive-through could cause serious road problems, maybe even mayhem in terms of people moving out from one lane into another. The other concern I've got is that you're going to have a jet wash, a drive-through Starbucks and a petrol station all coming in off one access road. I think that's I don't want to overstate it, but that's a recipe for disaster as well at a very, very busy strategic road. And finally, another concern is the operating hours of the Starbucks. If I've read it correctly, the operating hours for the Starbucks will finish at midnight, yet the supermarket just down the road stops at 10. I find that slightly inconsistent and quite odd. Chair, can I just give notice that I'm prepared to move a refusal on this if you come back to me, obviously at the end of debate. But if I can just give you notice that I have serious concerns about this. Obviously, I see with the numbers of objections and Uddingston Community Council, quite a comprehensive list of objections, that I'm happy to move a refusal on this matter. And if you come back to me at the relevant moment, Chair, I'll appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you, Graham. Fraser, do you want to come in at that point? The roads issues?
Okay. Excuse me, thank you, Chair. Yeah, it was from a roads point of view, the original transport statement was undertaken. We had asked for additional information to ensure that the issues that you referred to, Councillor Scott, wouldn't happen. What we asked them to do was to undertake a survey down at the Kilmarnock Road in Rutherglen Starbucks, because we felt that was fairly representative of the type of traffic flows that would be used. We also asked them to undertake traffic surveys on Bothwell Road at the Tesco traffic signals to get an indication of the existing queuing, because we are aware that sometimes the traffic signals can queue back towards where the access was going to be. In terms of overall traffic, it's worth highlighting that in terms of any new trips on the network, it's estimated that there would be only 25% of the trips would be new trips to the Starbucks drive-through. That's on the basis that people would be going from home to work or passing by en route and getting a coffee, which we feel that is kind of representative of what would happen. We also asked the consultant to review the likely queuing that would occur. Now that was based on an average time of queuing at the Rutherglen, Paisley and Hillington sites were roughly anywhere between 2 minutes and 10 seconds to 2 minutes and 17 seconds. But we know that that's not representative of what can happen on site, and I do appreciate, Councillor, that you're aware of instances that you mentioned. So what the consultant did was they reviewed the count information, and they put it into 15-minute peaks, and they were able to model the queue from their arrivals. So the analysis that was undertaken was modelled on a very similar size of Starbucks, and it showed the kind of anticipated queue lengths, and they were looking at a maximum queue of 11 vehicles at the peak time, which is on a Saturday at around 12:15. At all other times, the queuing was substantially less than that, though there are obviously peaks and troughs throughout that time. If you put 11 vehicles onto the proposed plan that we're looking at just now, the queue wouldn't extend back. It wouldn't interfere with the functioning of the petrol filling station, and it would obviously just wait in queue. And that peak obviously dissipates after time. So we are as confident as we can be in terms of the queuing that we would get from the Starbucks, based on a very similar Starbucks, with what we would anticipate being the closest one that we can compare against. I know there was representation from the one at Hamilton Palace, and we know there's issues there. However, that was felt that because it was next to the M74, it was a large town centre environment, and it was within a large retail area, that it wasn't overly comparable. And the trip generation that we actually got from the Dalmarnock Road and Rutherglen site was more than what was in the original transport statement, and we feel offers a robust kind of assessment of the anticipated queue lengths. In terms of the operation of the junction, the proposals are that there would be, on leaving the Starbucks restaurant, there would be a left turn and a right turn. So in terms of queuing, the junction was modelled, and it was shown that there would be kind of less than one car queuing at any time. There wasn't going to be any more than one car in the queue at that peak period. So there's 2 exit lanes, and there's one arrival lane with an island in the middle. And so in terms of formalising that junction, it would be deemed to be a much more, it would be easy to identify on the network. It would be a well-established junction, and would probably formalise the junction in terms of what's there just now with the petrol filling station. But there is also a right turn storage lane within the access, so that is off the public road, and that would allow anyone that's waiting to get into the petrol filling station to wait until they can cross safely, and that's highlighted as being a yellow box junction. So if there was anyone to queue back, then they shouldn't obviously stop in the yellow box. Also, it's worth mentioning that one of the conditions that we asked planning to include in the report was that the centre line of Bothwell Road be relocated slightly to make sure that traffic heading in a southbound direction wouldn't be held up by someone waiting to turn right into the site. So we feel that in terms of traffic on Bothwell Road, it would continue to continue to operate free-flowing, even if someone was waiting to turn right, and so shouldn't cause an issue with the traffic signals or queuing back, as potentially what may happen. Happy to answer any other points if you wish.
Thank you, Fraser. I'll invite Pauline to come in at that point. Pauline?
Thanks, Chair. I mean, just through you, obviously, I know members have questions about the transport aspects. Just wanted to pick up on Councillor Scott's comment about the hours of operation. I think Councillor Scott mentioned the hours of operation of the Tesco, which is to the rear of the site. But I think that the petrol filling station on the same site has later hours of operation. I wonder, Steve, can you confirm that, please?
Certainly, Pauline. The filling station is open. There's a sign in the filling station saying it's open from 6 a.m. to 12 midnight.
Okay, so just to confirm, through you, Chair, that the Starbucks hours of operation proposed are the same as those of the petrol filling station, which is on the same site. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Pauline. Councillor Nealon.
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to say that I echo all of Councillor Scott's concerns. I drive that way regularly and it always feels as though it's congested. I actually can't imagine what it would be like if it's anything like the retail park in Hamilton. I know Fraser said that it's not similar. At weekends, it's somewhere to be avoided. You simply can't get in. There are so many cars trying to get into Starbucks that they have to employ marshals to control the car flow. And it's just horrendous. That's not my question. My question is actually for Steve. Good morning, Steve.
Morning,
you said that you'd received more objection letters. There are 133 listed in the report. How many have been received in total, please?
Since the publication of the report, Councillor, there's been another 5 emails received in the office, all of which are from people who have previously expressed representation, basically amplifying their previous comments. That also includes one further representation from the MSP's office, and it's primarily, as I said earlier, about the fact that there's no hearing for the report, the timing of the application determination given the recent COP event in Glasgow and the environmental aspects that concerned, and also about the manner in which the application has been handled. Now, as you expect me to say, Councillor, I believe and I'm confident that the application has been handled as all applications are, in a competent and professional manner, taking on board all relevant aspects. Yes, there has been the delay, but that delay has been due to the requirement to get additional information clarification, the impact of COVID and getting surveys done, and the fact that there are just so many applications with us at the present time. So the additional emails that have come in are important to us, but they don't really raise any new concerns.
Thank you. I've got absolutely no doubt that it's been professionally handled. It's just a question to find out roughly how many more. So we've got just shy of 140 objection letters. That's great. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Councillor McCready.
Thanks, Chair. I've got a question for Fraser, but before I do, can I just say that I live closer than anybody else to this, maybe 2 miles away, and I drive along or walk along past this site pretty much every day. And Fraser's painted a bit of a picture of it, that everything will be fine and traffic will be flowing nice and smoothly through there. It won't, because it doesn't flow nice and smoothly just now. The traffic is really congested really most of the day, and certainly at school times and so on. So any additional traffic to this area is really going to cause chaos, to be honest. So this is my question to Fraser. As the application includes a drive-through, how many vehicles how many additional vehicles do we expect to be attracted to the area because of this application? If you can give me a number, Fraser, would be appreciated, rather than a percentage. Thank you.
Through your chair, yeah, of course. Okay, the surveys or the peak times are broken down into a weekday AM period, a weekday PM period, and a Saturday period, which is the peak at the weekend. So the number of new trips, a weekday AM period is 17 new trips, and the weekday PM is 8 trips, and during the Saturday it's 16 trips going in, coming out, and this is just to do with the way that it's been modelled. You're looking at 14 trips in the weekday AM period, 8 trips in the weekday PM period, and 15 trips back out on the Saturday peak period. I should have said that the peak periods have been worked out based on the information that was provided from the Starbucks in Dalmarnock Road in Rutherglen, and they picked the peaks were 8:15, 9:15 on a weekday, and 12:15 to 1:15 in the afternoon. And on a Saturday, the peak period was between 10 o'clock and 11 o'clock in the morning.
If I could come back, Chair, sorry.
Yes, I was just going to say you can come back in.
A supplementary, yeah. I don't quite get that, Fraser. Are we saying that there's only going to be 16 vehicles in a morning driving into that site? 16 extra vehicles?
Sorry, 16 new trips on the network, Councillor. Apologies if no, there's going to be a total be 67, and I'll take the worst one just I've got here. The weekday morning peak, you've got 67 in total going in, with 55 going out.
So it's okay. So there's going to be 120 movements, if you like. Well, given those numbers, even if they're accurate, I'd like to support Councillor Scott's refusal. We can't cope with any more congestion there and pollution, given there's a church nearby and a nursery nearby. So, as I say, at this point, I'll be supporting Councillor Scott's refusal. Thank you. Or seconding. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Pauline?
Apologies, Chair, I forgot to unmute myself. Just if Fraser could clarify again that you were talking additional vehicle movements. Just for members to bear in mind, there's already a petrol filling station on the site, which is generating a substantial number of vehicle movements. So if you could just say again the additional vehicle movements over and above if the Starbucks were to be allowed, please, Fraser, just to clarify that. Thanks, Chair.
Yeah, sorry, Pauline. So the way that it's been looked at is that there would be a total of 120 two-way movements into the Starbucks. However, of that, 75% of those trips would already be on the road network, and so the additional traffic that would be on the road would be the smaller numbers I mentioned earlier, which in total the maximum would be 15 two-way movements over the peak hour period.
Thank you, Fraser. Councillor Devlin?
Thanks, Chair. I think the other thing that's been forgot with the area is the fact there's also a garage there, an MOT garage, so there's traffic going in and out there as well. And Pauline has just highlighted the fact that there is a high volume of traffic going in just for the petrol station, because it is the only station in the area and it is used a lot with the community locally. And as Kenny, I'm a local member, I know it like the back of my hand, and I will be supporting Graham's refusal. Thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Thompson?
Thanks, Chair. Areas of multiple use, and this is one that's there, retail, there's a car wash, I believe, there's got to be a coffee place. The road I've passed by, although the local members obviously more knowledge, it's horrendous just now, and things will be exacerbated. I know the one in Hamilton, I mean, it's horrendous. It's a lot worse than maybe people imagine unless they travel at the weekend. I do get out at the weekend, it's really bad. And I've got a similar site of multiple use in my area, although it's not a coffee place, it's a garage with a pending application, I believe, for a fast food takeaway, and the Redburn Farm sits next to it, and the traffic one way in and out, and when the traffic comes out there, I say any area, but this one in particular, similar I think, multiple use, as the traffic came out, and we've got problems here now because of the waste amenity right next to it, and what happens there is you get traffic queuing right up onto the main drive at Main Street, and what happens is recipe for disaster. It can't cope, and the thing with one in Hamilton to go away, I'd certainly support my colleagues, especially Councillor Scott there. I wouldn't be happy with my area, and so I'd certainly not be happy with it in any other area. It just doesn't look sensible. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Donnelly?
It was just a question for Stephen. Are we talking 140 objections? Is that, Glenn, was that the figure you got?
The report details that, let's say there's been an extra 5 received, Councillor, and it just takes over 140. I would point out some of them, just like the letters of support, are from the same individual. So there are multiple representations from some individuals and some addresses. But that's not unusual nowadays, given the fact that a large number of representations are received by email.
Thanks for that, Stephen. Stephen, can I ask you, is that kind of figure for objections to any planning application, would you say that's a high figure of responsive objections?
In comparison to the number of parties that were notified, Councillor, yes, it is. But nowadays, the application was also advertised in the local newspaper as per requirements. And nowadays, with social media and such like, I believe in some applications we tend to get amplified number of representations received because it's easy to ask people to support your position.
Can I ask one more question? I know I'm
on you go.
Taking advantage, Chair. On our policy and active travel, and we've just had COP26, would it not be against the policies of that going forward if we're going to have congestion at this place for the cafe?
Councillor Donnelly, most forms of development will generate traffic. The policies are aimed to try and provide alternatives to that. And this application, as well as being application site, as well as being on a main transport corridors, I think it's the B7071 or such like, it's well connected for pedestrians. There's provision within the site and the development for bicycle racks. There's 3 electrical charging points. So that movement towards non-car travel has been started. We know from COP that it's not going to be an overnight thing. And indeed, we can't just stop all development or stop all road traffic. It was just not possible. But we have got to put in the facilities and the means and methods in which we can try and encourage people to use their car less. And I think that has already started, especially in terms of electric vehicles. And this one does makes provision for the 3 spaces for electric vehicle charging. So we're on that road to what the outcome of COP26 and other local development plan policies want. And this development has to have a balanced judgment between all these competing interests.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Craig?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I'm trying to make head and tail of what's in front of us here, Stephen. So the hatched area that's on the plan is a very large area. Now, within that area, I don't know the area. I don't know that particular place very well. But is there not a service station shop which sells coffee?
There is that facility at that kiosk, Councillor Craig. Yes.
Right. So, is the idea to knock that down and build a Starbucks in that hatched area?
No.
The Starbucks, Councillor Craig, is proposed adjacent to the common boundary with the golf course. And the filling station, petrol filling station, the only proposal for the way that's affected is the demolition of a freestanding, it looks to me like a 1970s drive-through car wash, which will be replaced elsewhere by 2 car jet wash bays. The existing petrol filling station is largely unaffected by the development, and obviously it's up to the operator of that car wash to decide what facilities goods they wish to sell from the kiosk.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Hamilton?
Thanks, Chair. It was just a question for Fraser around why the Kilmarnock Starbucks was chosen. As a frequent frequenter of Starbucks as my daughter doesn't sleep, then I feel the Kilmarnock one is a bit out the way. I feel like the East Kilbride one would have been better to fit monitor the flow of traffic because it's obviously on the main road, and I know from passing through the East Kilbride one that's always congested. So I was just wondering, you keep going back to obviously what it was like in Kilmarnock, and that's one of the quieter ones. So I just don't feel like that picture that's been built up is a correct one, especially since in probably the Boswell and Uddingston area there's not really anything else of that type. Like I drive through Coffee Place there anyway, and a lot of people will use it because it is obviously a popular store. So I was just wondering why the Kilmarnock one was chosen over East Kilbride.
Yeah, the Kilmarnock one was really chosen one because there's a supermarket relatively close to it, like the Tesco in Bothwell. Also, in terms of the sort of residential areas, you've got Kilmarnock across the bridge in Glasgow, and you've got Rutherglen and Cambuslang as the route through. And whilst it is in a kind of area where there's a large kind of shopping area, it's not a retail park as such. And it was felt that would be the most representative. The transport statement was actually done based on Trix, which was a site that we down in England, and it's off a dual carriageway, and it was thought that would have quite a high trip generation to it. But actually, it turned out that the Kilmarnock Road does have a high trip generation, higher than that one, and so we kind of felt that was fairly robust in terms of it. To be honest, that was the one that was proposed, and we felt that was a reasonable comparison. But all sites are different. Say that the Hamilton Palace was ruled out because of the M74 and the large town centre next to it.
Okay, thank you, Fraser. Councillor Thompson, did you want to come back in?
Yeah, I did, Chair. Just very quickly, I just find it strange that we're trying to get people to drive less, but we seem to be promoting a drive-through with more cars polluting the environment. Just an observation.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Devlin, you want to come back in?
Yes, thanks, Chair. It's just a question for Fraser so that I can clarify it in my head anyway. The one at Kilmarnock Road, there's a set of traffic lights to control the flow there, isn't there? It's the same one I'm thinking of. That's fine. Thanks, Fraser.
Thank you. Councillor McCreary?
Thanks, Chair. Just a final point. I don't really think we're comparing like for like here. As Maureen's just mentioned, there's traffic lights to control. There's the East Kilbride ones, I guess, are maybe in dual carriageways and things. This is right. This is really right in the centre of a small town, a small and very busy town. So it's not, I can't imagine anything else that I'm aware of that could be compared with this. This is a new thing altogether, in fact, putting the Starbucks. And Bert's point's absolutely right. We should be encouraging people not to drive their cars through places. We should be encouraging them to walk to places and get there. So this is going to cause tremendous congestion, additional pollution in a small town that's already very busy. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor McLaughlin?
Thanks, Chair. I would support the nomination to refuse this application based on my experiences in the local one in Hamilton. Only last week I had a meeting with Colin Park and Stuart Laird regarding a different issue, and we touched on the terrible traffic congestion that we experience down at the Palace Grounds Retail Park. In one example, I waited 40 minutes to get from halfway down Muir Street to get past the roundabout at Asda because the traffic was queuing to get in there, albeit there's more than one drive-through there. There's McDonald's and so on, so that will generate extra traffic over and above Starbucks. So the traffic that goes to this particular one is way beyond what I think anybody expected. And there's an interesting factoid that I can throw in here. I'm a director on the Hamilton bid, and at a recent meeting, the bid manager, Malcolm Thomas Harley, gave us an update that the Starbucks in the Palace Grounds Retail Park was the busiest Starbucks in Europe. Just get that into context here. the busiest Starbucks in Europe. You get places like Paris and Rome, you name it. This was the busy, because of its location now, it is handy because we know that people travel to Starbucks. I've got daughters myself who use it frequently, and they go to different Starbucks because it's just a very attractive place for a lot of young people to go and congregate and gather and so on. Now, this one's hardly a couple of miles away from it. And when you think of Bothwell and Uddingston in that area and Dew Park, a lot of people who may have been going to travel to the Palace Grounds Retail Park will be attracted to Bothwell and Uddingston. So I could imagine the increase in traffic in that and Kenny's made a great point. I know that road well. I'm a driving instructor. I use that route sometimes, and I take my learners up into that area because it's so congested to get them used to dealing with busy traffic. I hate to think what sort of state the roads are going to be in there if there's a very busy Starbucks opening up in that location. So that's my comment, Chair. For other, I don't know. I mean, it's my comment, and I'm passing that on for other members' information. So I'll be supporting the refusal, Chair. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. I'll move the report.
I'll second it, Chair.
Okay, thank you. And I believe we've got a refusal. Councillor Scott?
Thank you, Chair. Just unmuted myself there. Yes, I'm prepared to move a refusal on the grounds of that the application will have a negative impact on access, parking and traffic movements in the general vicinity. Hopefully, members, that's a slightly off-the-cuff reasoning for the refusal, but a negative impact on access, parking and traffic movement in the general vicinity. Hopefully that will do as proper grounds for a refusal motion, and hopefully I'll find a seconder for it, Chair. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And I believe Councillor McCreary, you want to second?
Yes, thanks, Chair. I'll second it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So I think we'll have to go to a vote now, Stuart.
Yep, thanks, Chair. Okay, so the motion moved by Councillor Dorman and seconded by Councillor Horsham is that planning permission is approved. And the amendment moved by Councillor Graham Scott and Councillor Kenny McCreary is that planning permission is refused on the grounds that it would have a negative impact on access, parking and traffic movements. So we'll take a vote by roll call. Councillor John Anderson. Refuse.
Stuart.
Sorry. Councillor Alec Allison.
Amendment.
Councillor John Anderson. Amendment, I gather. Councillor Anderson. Councillor Anderson. We'll come back to Councillor Anderson. Councillor John Bradley.
Amendment.
Councillor Arch Buchanan.
Amendment.
Councillor Jackie Burns.
Refuse.
Councillor Margaret Cowie.
Amendment.
Councillor Peter Craig.
Motion.
Councillor Maureen Devlin.
Amendment.
Councillor Mary Donnelly.
I'm a bit confused. What's the amendment?
Amendment is to refuse planning permission.
Right.
Motion is to approve.
Somebody said refuse, so I thought we were dealing with the amendment.
Councillor Isabel Dorman.
Motion.
Councillor Lindsay Hamilton.
Amendment.
Councillor Mark Horsham.
Motion.
Councillor Martin Grant Hose.
Amendment.
Councillor Martin Lennon, I believe, is no longer present. Councillor David McLaughlin.
Amendment.
Sorry, I've missed Councillor Kenny McCreary.
Amendment.
Councillor Lynn Nealon.
Amendment.
Councillor Carol Nugent.
Amendment.
Councillor Graham Scott.
Amendment.
Councillor David Shearer.
Amendment.
Councillor Bert Thompson. Councillor Thompson. Councillor Thompson, can you hear me? Councillor Thompson does appear still to be present. Councillor Thompson?
Sorry, can you hear us now? Amendment.
Thank you. Councillor John Mortar?
Amendment.
Councillor John Anderson, can I clarify?
Yeah, the amendment. Sorry, I lost connection there just as I was voting.
Thank you. Okay, 18 members have voted in favour of the amendment and 3 members have voted in favour of the motion. Therefore, declare that the amendment is carried.
Thank you, Stuart. Moving on to agenda item 5 is application P211107, and that's on pages 55 to 94. And I'll ask Tony to take us through the item. Thank you, Tony.
Yes, thank you, Chair. So this report relates to an application that's been made to the Scottish Government under Section 36 of the Electricity Act 1989. It's for the erection of 8 wind turbines. 7 would have a tip height of 220 metres and 1 would have a tip height of 200 metres. The proposals also include on-site access tracks, a 150 metre high anemometer mast, and also battery storage. Construction traffic, including the delivery of turbines, would be via an existing access from the B7078, which also serves other wind farms in the locality. So in this case, the Energy Consent Unit of the Scottish Government are the consenting authority, and the Council are a statutory consultatory in that process. The application site is located approximately 7 kilometres southwest of Glesbin and 11 kilometres southwest of Douglas. The main body of the site comprises commercial forestry and extends to some 1,031 hectares in area. The site is located immediately to the west of the Kinnick's Head wind farm, which comprises 17 180-metre turbines, and that's currently under construction. It's also next to a consented extension to that wind farm, comprising 6 turbines, again of 180 metres, but construction hasn't yet started on that site. And the current proposal is considered to comprise a second extension to the Kinnick's Head wind farm. In terms of site history, the site currently benefits from an extended planning permission for the erection of 9 turbines of 125 metres. 6 of those were within the council area, and 3 of them extend into the boundary of East Ayrshire Council. And collectively, those 9 turbines were called Penbreck Wind Farm. The applicant has stated that the permission relating to Penbreck would be replaced by these current proposals. Consultation that the planning service has carried out has been limited to other services within the council, but wider consultation and publicity has been carried out separately by the Scottish Government. The responses to the consultation are set out in Section 4 of the report, and members will see that no objections have been received. A range of matters highlighted by consultees will be dealt with by conditions that the report recommends will be forwarded to the government as part of the council's response, and these are all set out in the paper apart. So coming to the assessment, Section 6 of the report sets out a very significant assessment of proposals against national, strategic and local plan policy. The previous granting of consent of the 9 turbines at Penbreck is relevant and it establishes the principle that wind farm development in this locality is acceptable. The current proposals do involve taller turbines than those previously approved. However, the number has been reduced to 8, and the layout has been redesigned so it comprises a more compact and less extensive cluster than the previous permission. In assessing whether the increase in turbine height is acceptable, cognizance has been taken of the updated landscape capacity study and guidance on tall turbine development that's been adopted since the original Pembroke application. In addition, other wind farm development has been granted on sites within the locality, and that includes the Kennex Head wind farm, as I said, and its extension, which comprise 180-metre tall turbines. So in terms of the landscape capacity of the area, the rolling nature of the landscape provides a background and a backcloth in which to frame the turbines within the application site. In a landscape of this scale and taking account of the heights and topography of the surrounding wind farms, the proposals would not appear out of keeping within this landscape, say, which is already characterised by wind farms. The proposals have been designed to read as an extension to Kennex Head and its extension. So overall, if granted, this would read as one development. Overall, it's considered that the landscape has the capacity to accommodate the height increase. In addition, the turbines would rise out of the existing forestry, which would initially soften their appearance on the landscape. The design and layout of the turbines and the separation distance and scale of the landscape also minimises the visual impact the proposals would have on surrounding settlements and also individual receptors. And as the report makes clear in great detail, there are no concerns in terms of other issues, and particularly note in terms of road safety, noise and shadow flicker. So overall, it's considered that the proposals accord with national, strategic and local plan policy on renewable energy development. It's therefore recommended that the Council, in its consultation response back to the Government, does not object to the application, but that be subject to the conditions listed in the paper part and also the conclusion of a legal agreement to address the matters described on the front page of the report.
Thank you, Tony. Councillor Nealon?
Thank you, Chair. I know you've touched on this already, Tony, but this particular area does come up with wind farm applications on what feels like a very regular basis. And what I would personally find helpful, I don't know about other members on the committee, is if we could have an accompanying map showing all the wind farm activity in that location so that we can do a comparison to see how much more of an impact it would have. Would that be possible going forward with future applications, perhaps?
Yeah, through you, Chair, yes. We do have an up-to-date plan showing wind farm activity throughout South Lancashire. So I could certainly get that sent to the members of the committee anyway. And it might not be possible to attach that plan to future reports, but we can maybe add it to or make it available before committees in the future when wind farm applications come up for consideration, if that's okay.
Thank you very much. I would find that very helpful. Thanks.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. Still get your hand up, thank you. Gail, move the report.
I'll second it, Chair.
Agree with the report? Throw your hands back up again, Lynn. Okay, thank you.
Great.
Thank you. Agenda item 6 will wait for Councillor Ellison to leave.
As Councillor Ellison left the meeting, Chair.
Thank you, Chair. Sure. Agenda item 6 is application P210215, and that's in pages 95 to 110. I'll ask Stephen to take us through that application. Thank you.
Thank you once more, Chair. This is essentially an application to put an extension to the existing chicken shed. The extension is essentially a replica of what is on ground already, thereby doubling the size of the chicken facility at the location. Location is in the rural area of the council's area, close, or I would maybe say in the shadow of Tinto Hill. It is surrounded by trees. The site itself and the existing facility is not immediately obvious from the main road that passes the site. It is well screened by a number of trees, and although there are archaeological and other aspects within the area, this proposal will not have any adverse impact on that. As I said quickly, the site is well screened. It represents further investment and job retention within the rural area. Access to the site is gained by a relatively long private access road, which helps further hide the facility. And you will notice that there's been no third-party representations received from interested members of the public. The recommendation is to issue consent subject to the recommended conditions. And again, I'm more than welcome to answer any questions anyone has regarding the report and the application.
Thank you, Stephen. Councillor Shearer?
Thank you, Chair. Just to ask Stephen, this is obviously an agricultural building on an agricultural site. I'm surprised that it even has to come before the committee. Is there any reason why it's deemed that it has to come before committee?
It's surprising because there's no representations, Councillor, but the reason is it's because of the floor space. It is quite a large building, and there are limitations in terms of sizes which we have to report applications to committee.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. I'll move the report.
I'll second that.
Thank you. Agree the report? Okay, thank you.
Okay, Chair, I'll
We'll wait
just
for Councillor Ellison to come back
invite
in.
him back, yep. Chair, that's Councillor Allison back in the meeting.
Thank you, Stuart. We're just approaching 11 o'clock, so I think we'll have a comfort break. If we can maybe be back for about 11:05, if that suits everyone.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Chair.
Okay, so if we can just do the sediment again by roll call. Councillor Ali Carlison.
Guilty.
Councillor John Anderson.
Here.
Councillor John Bradley.
Here.
Councillor Arch Buchanan.
Here.
Councillor Jackie Burns. Councillor Margaret Cowie.
Here.
Councillor Peter Craig.
Here.
Councillor Maureen Devlin.
Present.
Councillor Mary Donnelly. Councillor Isabel Dorman. Present.
Here.
Councillor Lindsay Hamilton.
Here.
Councillor Kenny McCreary.
I'm here, Stuart.
Councillor Mark Horsham.
I'm here.
Councillor Martin Grant Hose.
Present.
Councillor Martin Lennon.
Present.
Councillor David McLaughlin. Councillor McLaughlin.
Here.
Councillor Lynn Nayland.
Here.
Councillor Carol Nugent.
Carol's put an apology in the sidebar there. Her internet's out for service. She'll join if she can.
Okay, we'll let IT know, thank you. Councillor Graham Scott.
Here.
Councillor David Shearer.
Here.
Councillor Bert Thompson.
Here.
Councillor Jim Motter.
Here.
Thank you. Thanks, Chair.
Thanks, Stuart. Councillor Donnelly's got a hand up. I think it's just to let us know that she's back in. Okay, thank you.
Do that, Chair, thank you, yep.
Thank you. Agenda item 7, application P210638, and that's in pages 111 to 120. And I'll hand over to Stevens for that one. Thank you. Stephen, you're on mute.
Stephen.
Apologies about that. Thank you, Chair. This application relates to the change use of an area of open space to private garden ground at the property at 17 Leek 1 Hunt Hill Road, Blantyre. The site itself is shown on page 120 of the committee papers, and I would highlight that it extends to approximately 62 square metres. I must also point out to committee that since this report was published, one further representation is received, bringing the number of representations up to 22. The representation is from a member of the public who has already expressed concern, and they just wanted to add to their objection about the change in levels of the site. The site itself sits at the side of the house at the junction with Afton Gardens. It is not level and has a gentle slope from pavement level up to the neighbouring properties. You'll notice from the report that the area, in terms of local development plan, it's just a general urban area, and requests like this and applications like this have been approved previously. I've just lost my mouse in the report. The application has been the subject of these representations, primarily about the fact that the applicant at present uses his property for a business, primarily manufacturing timber sheds. This has been investigated by colleagues in the enforcement section, and action is being taken to address that aspect, which is unauthorised, doesn't have planning consent, and without predetermining anything, is of a scale and nature which would be difficult to support to be taken at a house. As a result, enforcement action will be taken to address that aspect of it. You'll notice that there was a previous application for a similar approval at the site. This was withdrawn because it related to the whole area of open space at the junction, and the applicant was advised that that would be difficult to support. The fact, however, that the site area has been reduced by about 2/3 to 62 square metres means that the impact at the junction of Hunt Hill Road and Afton Gardens is not so significant as it previously was with the application that was withdrawn. The consultations undertaken, roads have no adverse comments, estates have no, but you'll notice that the Blantyre Community Council is opposed to the application due to loss of amenity. Again, I would have to highlight to you that this area is approximately 1/3 of the overall area, and that being at the top adjacent to the house where there are existing garden fences and some bushes, its impact on the amenity of the area is within acceptable limits from a planning point of view. As I say, the representations raise all aspects about the business, about the misses of the open space for Afton Gardens, etc. The fact that the business can cause issues with vehicles being parked at the junction, and therefore that is being addressed through the enforcement action. Hopefully the business will find suitable alternative locations, etc. And that also questioning why consent was issued for the house previously. It was issued way back in about 2007 for that new house. Overall, in terms of the assessment and conclusions of the application, there is a focus that we should approve applications that comply with the provisions of the development plan. And in simplistic terms, the area that is now the subject of this application is 62 square metres. It is relatively small. There are no substantial planning considerations which, from an amenity perspective, we believe could justify refusal, and therefore the recommendation is to issue consent subject to the conditions imposed. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen. Any questions for Stephen? Councillor Scott.
Thank you, Chair. Once again, thank you, Stephen, for his report. If you think I had problems with the last one, you should wait to hear what I've got on this one. In terms of procedural aspects, and I'll give you all my list of woes on relating to this one. We as a council, and obviously I'm reading the report and I've read and I've listened to Stephen there, again, my procedural problems. We, South Lanarkshire Council, if the report is to be listed as correct, are negotiating with we are negotiating to sell public land to someone we are taking enforcement action against. The optics on that are terrible, genuinely terrible for the administration and for the council. So I accept that it's not a direct planning matter, but obviously it's listed in the report. Another thing is that the applicant is not trying to buy all of the site. He's only applying to buy 62 square metres out of 193 square metres. So again, where does that leave the other 2/3? If he does get his wish to buy that land, which leads me to the actual planning application. I don't think we should be considering this today at all, and I'll tell you why. We could be making a decision on relating to this that could impinge or maybe not impinge upon the enforcement action being taken by the council. My view is that enforcement action is paramount, and that should trump, for want of a better phrase, any other actions or applications that are about. The very fact that he is operating an illegal business should be enough for us. We are taking enforcement action. The idea that we are considering this, and I know the argument, he'll pay his application fees, entitled to put in an application for whatever he wants. Yes, but my fear is that any decision we could take on this before the enforcement action has been dealt with could be prejudicial to the enforcement action that we are taking, and maybe even give the applicant an escape route from his enforcement action. So that's why again, Chair, I'm giving notice that I want to move a deferral on the grounds that the enforcement action should be deferring on the grounds that enforcement action should be completed and that the applicant has been relocated, because I know the council are trying to offer him a relocated area for his business. The idea that we are dealing with this while we are taking enforcement action, again, the public optics, and again, there's some very good points made by Blantyre Community Council. I don't think we should be even looking at this until enforcement action is completed and or the applicant has been located. Because remember, he's operating an illegal business. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Graham. I'll get Pauline to come in then.
Thanks, Chair. Through you, I mean, I do understand the points that Councillor Scott is making about the optics and the perception, but they are two separate legal issues. I mean, the planning authority is a separate legal entity, albeit sometimes when I'm explaining planning to members of the public or customers, or I do think that does sound awful strange. How can that side be this? How can that side be that? I can assure members that if you do agree to grant this application, which is a change of use of open space to garden ground, that will not prevent in any way us taking enforcement action against the operation of the unlawful business on the site. To be fair, and Scottish Government does tell us to take they say a pragmatic approach to enforcement, particularly when there are jobs and livelihoods around through the pandemic, because, to be fair to the applicant, moving your business in the middle of a pandemic, not necessarily an easy thing to do, but we have commenced enforcement and that will run regardless of the decision that you make today. However, if members don't feel comfortable with it, and I'm getting the sense that you don't, you can either refuse the application, or the other thing you could do is defer it either until the enforcement action has reached its conclusion or the business has relocated to a new site, whichever is the sooner. So just to kind of put that on the table now, Chair, to try and be helpful. Thank you.
Thank you, Pauline. And I agree 100% with what Graham has said, but I'll bring in Monica at this point.
Thank you, Chair. It was just really to respond to some of the points that Councillor Scott and Pauline have made, to echo some of the points really that both of them made, although it does seem a strange thing. The enforcement issue isn't, as Councillor Scott acknowledged himself, not a direct planning matter in today's determination. The paramount consideration for the planning authority today is whether the application is in accordance with the development plan, or whether there are relevant planning material considerations of such weight as to indicate that the development plan should not be given supremacy. In this case, where a decision is made on the basis of irrelevant material considerations, unfortunately that decision is challengeable, regardless of whether there are real concerns. What we have to be considered, what we have to consider as a planning authority is whether the material consideration relates to the use and development of the land, not the identity of the individual or any other planning applications they may have not made in the past, or any enforcement action that has been raised against them. In terms of the proposals the proposal either to defer or to refuse, as I said, if a decision is made by the planning authority to refuse an application and that's not based on a relevant planning consideration, that is challengeable. If the decision was made to defer, the risk to the planning authority with that is that there may then be an appeal based on a failure to determine, and obviously my role today is just to bring that to the attention of the planning authority. Thank you.
Thank you, Monica. Councillor Alison?
Yeah, sorry, I'm just trying to take into consideration what Monica has said. Where I was going to start from this was a deferral, because I believe there is sufficient evidence here that although the planning application is for a transfer to garden, there is an indication from his use of the land already that may not be the case. And therefore, I think we have solid grounds to, I would take advice on whether it was deferral or refuse at this time, until we can have sufficient evidence that it is going to be a garden that it is going to be used for, and not simply an extension to his current business.
Thank you, Alec. Councillor Wardtop?
Yeah, my objection to this particular proposal is more in terms of, I'm always reluctant to go along with transfer of communal ground to a private individual unless there is a pressing need for it. And in this particular case, I don't see any pressing need. And, there is a possibility of further down the line it could cause problems. I'd be much happier with just a straight refusal on the grounds of a reduction in amenity for the local area. And that's what I would move.
Thank you, Jim. Councillor Thompson?
Thanks, Chair. Can you hear us okay?
Yes.
Yeah. I would go with Councillor Scott, the deferral, although I'm willing to hear what other people say, even the refusal. The reason being, I've been approached by the community councils, very vocal, and obviously first level of local government, who are clearly against it. I told them I couldn't discuss it because of my position on planning. Then the residents groups have also approached us, as have several people came to my door. They all told the same thing. I understand your concerns. I can't discuss it. But when I look at things and I see it's a small piece of land, is it that significant? 62 square metres, what does he really need that for? I mean, I'm beginning to wonder the reason. It's a small bit of land that I'm sure they could do without getting. I wouldn't think there's any immediate need for it, and I would certainly not be comfortable in them getting it. A loss of a public amenity, as Jim says, is very concerning and something I don't see it needs to happen. I wouldn't feel comfortable him getting the permission there. Thank you.
Thank you. Monica, do you want to come back in?
Thank you, Chair. I mean, in terms of the amendment proposed by Councillor Wardtop, I would say that the reduction in amenity in the local area would be considered a relevant planning consideration as it relates to the land and the land and the use of the land. Therefore, if that was the decision that's been made by the planning authority, then that would be a more, I would say, defendable decision. Obviously, it would still be for the applicant to decide whether or not he wanted to appeal that decision. But in terms of legally defending that decision, I would say that there is a stateable case to put forward. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Anderson?
Alec Allison actually, I think, hit the nail on the head there with the fact that, is this going to be garden ground? How could we ensure it when we're already in loggerheads with them about using the premises as illegal business? And I think Jim Wardtop was right about the loss of the amenity ground. On that, though, he doesn't own that ground. He's in negotiation. So if we deferred it, would he still carry on with the negotiation and buy the ground? Or is he sort of saying, I'm only going to buy the ground if you give me planning permission? So if we defer it, I think we could force his hand. That way we wouldn't be losing the land to him, because I personally wonder whether he would actually go ahead and purchase the land if he doesn't actually have planning permission. So I'd agree with Graham in deferring it.
Thank you, John. Councillor Craig?
Yeah, I'm the same as almost everybody else. The deferral until such times as we settle the outcome of this business, and we can review it with fresh eyes then.
Thanks, Peter. Councillor Lennon?
Yeah, I think I'm kind of minded to support Councillor Wardtop's position here. I think that we should always be a wee bit wary about the loss of kind of communal open space. And although it's like quite a small area here, that does have a kind of a cumulative impact. But really, kind of like generally, it was raised earlier that we should be taking a pragmatic approach to enforcing planning issues, and I think I was a wee bit troubled by the line that was being taken there, because, like, to me, a pragmatic approach is to enforce planning restrictions more harshly and more effectively. There there are instances in my local area where people are like very clearly in breach of both planning and licensing, and action just isn't taken against them. And I think sometimes, it was mentioned, it can be difficult to relocate your business during a pandemic and this or that, and there are always kind of like potentially extenuating circumstances that excuse kind of giving people a wee bit more time and a wee bit more understanding. But fundamentally, what people are doing, if they are in breach of planning regulations, if they're running a business illegally from a residential property rather than paying proper business rates, is they're undercutting people that play by the rules. They're undercutting other businesses that are actually paying their taxes fairly, going through all the proper regulations and actually obeying the law. And if we have this attitude where, well, we'll give people or we'll give business owners kind of a loose lead so that they can, well, people make mistakes. No, some businesses are actually run properly. Some businesses actually play by the rules, and we shouldn't be punishing them by allowing other people to get away from it. Although that doesn't have a huge amount to do with my attitude to the case here. I think this is a case of a loss of open space to the community, but I think it's worth raising because I don't think that attitude should be going unchallenged.
Thank you, Martin. Pauline?
Thanks. Just to clarify, thanks through you, Chair. I mean, members have the comfort that we'll be bringing our enforcement charter and protocol to the December meeting of the Planning Committee to ask you to review the prioritisation of that. So you'll be able to have a good chow over and debate of planning enforcement in general terms at that committee. Just to make you aware that our enforcement caseload since the start of the pandemic has doubled. So we now have over 400 live enforcement cases between 3 enforcement officers. Now, a lot of those, I would say the vast majority, are neighbour disputes. Now, that's not to say that people are or aren't doing things that they shouldn't, but there is certainly a level of people noticing what's going on in their neighbourhood and complaining about it. But anyway, you will be able to have that debate, in due course. The pragmatic stance is actually something that has been promoted and asked for and supported by Scottish Government. They sent out letters to councils at the start of the pandemic asking us to basically turn a blind eye to things like tables on pavements, queuing outside shops, a way of ensuring that businesses could continue to trade throughout the pandemic. And as usual, this is the conflict between planning and economic development. And I'm, of course, head of both, so I'm totally confused quite a lot of the time, Chair. But the Scottish Government throughout the pandemic have extended the time frame by which they want us to be pragmatic. And bear in mind, when I sit at another committee where I take papers to, the members on that committee, Community and Enterprise, are saying, what are you doing to boost the economy, Pauline? What about businesses? What are you doing to support businesses? But notwithstanding that, completely separate, Scottish Government have now written to councils asking us to take this pragmatic approach until the end of 2022. And bear in mind that appeals and enforcement, they have a role to play. So that's really what I was referring to. However, we will be able to have a full debate about planning enforcement next month, just as a wee Christmas present for you members. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Pauline. Councillor McLaughlin?
Thanks, Chair. I'm tending to go along the line of deferring this. I mean, if this applicant didn't have the enforcement action hanging over him, to refuse something like that, the loss of public amenity, it's in a wedged area. It's not exactly going to be dead. I mean, I don't know how many people would walk up into a wedged area or use that piece of land. It's just a piece of land that's really not of any value. So under normal circumstances, you wouldn't think twice about this, I think. I know some other people will maybe disagree with that, but the loss of public amenity is an issue. But in this case, it wouldn't be. However, Monica made a point, and from an official point of view, yeah, we've got to listen to officials. But the reason why we have planning committees is so that members are listening to people who have got concerns and coming to local members, and like Bert and the community council and so on. And given the nature of this, I think it's right to send a message, a very clear message, to anyone you can't just scrap the rules. You know, Martin Lennon made a very good point. There's lots of businesses, and I can name a few in my area, where people have done things not the right way, but other people who do things the right way, there's costs to that. So it makes an unlevel playing field. So in this instance, you know, I listened to Monica and I listened to what the rules are and how you need to defend that, but I'm afraid that's back over to you. If we make a decision here to defer this, you'll need to find the formal words to try and defend that, Monica, I think, if the committee agrees. So I would fully support, until this mess, let's call it, is sorted out, that we defer this application. And I think if this man wants to purchase this piece of land for his garden, then fantastic. Good luck to him, if that's genuinely what he wants to do with it. But a lot of people have got their suspicions in this committee, and a lot of members of the public have got their suspicions. And I think it'd be wrong if we granted that today. I think the right thing to do would be to defer it. And if there's a difficulty in doing that, I'm afraid that's back over to you, Monica, to come up with a way of defending that. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, David. Councillor Water?
I don't know how much this amenity space is used by the local community, obviously, but the general principle, you know, that I would always adopt is, I don't see that somebody wanting a bigger garden, leave aside, you know, the enforcement thing and what would it be used for. That's crystal ball stuff in a lot of ways. But the principle that we transfer amenity ground to an individual for a bigger garden, you know, I would object on that basis alone. You know, far less getting into all the rigmarole of enforcement and how he's going to use it in the future. And I would still maintain that this should be refused, and that's what I would move.
Thank you, Jim. Councillor Scott, want to come back in?
Yes, thank you, Chair. As I say, I sympathise greatly with the view that Councillor Wardhall and Councillor Lennon has put about the point of principle about the sale of public land. I get that absolutely. But the fact is that our Estates Department have started negotiating, and as the report said, have exchanged letters with the applicant. So obviously that negotiating, by the way, we sell land nearly all the time. I mean, Pauline will tell you, we as a council sell land. You'll see it on all the committees that we do sell land to people. So that's why, and again, it's the great point that Councillor Anderson made, is that I suspect that if this gets solved in terms of his business gets relocated, we find another location for him, then I suspect this application will disappear. Also, I suspect that the local members, I know, can take up the fact with the enforcement of it and the Estates Department in terms of why is this land being sold? At the end of the day, the council, we can decide what bits of land we decide to sell or not decide to sell. So my view would be, in many ways, leave it with the local members to pursue estates and say, why are you selling this land to anybody? Therefore, if the negotiations are pulled out by the council in terms of selling the land to the applicant, this is dead in the water anyway. I think that's the point Councillor Anderson was making. That's why I understand the refusal and I have great sympathy and support for the principle. But I think the pragmatic, to use that word again, would be a deferral on the grounds that we wait for the enforcement action to be completed and or the illicit firm has been located somewhere else. Because I suspect the horizon here will be very different when the enforcement is finished in terms of what the applicant wants or doesn't want or thinks he can get away with or not get away with. Thank you so much, Chair.
Thank you, Graham. Councillor McLaughlin?
Thanks, Chair. Just very briefly, just following on from Jim Mortaw's comments, taking that as a point of principle, you can have that view, but at the end of the day, it's a facility that's available to members of the public or landowners or who want to buy another piece of land. It happens all the time, all over the place. Now, to use that as a reason to refuse the application just flies in the face of the fact that we have a policy where we do sell the land. It just seems, I'm sorry, Jim, but it just doesn't seem to make any sense. I need to disagree with that completely. There's lots of places where people, and it's sometimes to the benefit of the council, you get a capital receipt and it's taken over pieces of land that no one uses. You know, you say public amenity, but there's lots of pieces of land that no one uses for whatever reason. And if we can get a capital receipt for that, we then don't have maintenance issues. Someone else is getting the benefit. What is wrong with that? You know, so that's just a general point, Chair. I really maybe shouldn't have brought it up, but I'm not sorry that I did.
Okay, David, thank you. Now, I don't see any other hands. So Graham's moved a deferral, and I'm quite happy to second that. And Jim has moved a refusal. I don't know if there's anyone want to second Jim? Don't see any other hands. So keep me right, Stuart, but I think that means that a deferral has been approved.
Can I just clarify, Councillor Lennon, I think, had said earlier that he wished to second Councillor Wardtalk. Can I just clarify if that's the case or not?
Yes, I'm happy to second it.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, and can I just clarify, is anybody minded to move the recommendation in the report? Okay, so we have two amendments. Given that the amendment proposed by Councillor Scott and Councillor Dorman was proposed first, we'll take that as the motion. So that is that permission is deferred until the application, deferred consideration of application on the grounds that enforcement action should be completed or until the applicant's business has been relocated. And the amendment is to refuse plan permission in terms of reduction of amenity. As been proposed by council. Sorry, can you repeat that, please? I don't think that was actually anybody speaking. That might just been background. Can I just clarify? Was anybody wanting to ask something? Okay, so just to recap, the motion is to defer and the amendment is to refuse planning permission. Councillor Alec Allison.
I'll go for the motion.
Councillor John Anderson.
Motion.
Councillor John Bradley.
Motion.
Councillor Arch Buchanan.
Motion.
Councillor Margaret Cowie.
Motion.
Councillor Peter Craig.
Motion.
Councillor Maureen Devlin.
Motion.
Councillor Mary Donnelly.
Motion.
Councillor Isabel Dorman.
Motion.
Councillor Lindsay Hamilton.
Motion.
Councillor Mark Horsham.
Motion.
Councillor Martin Grant-Hose.
Motion.
Councillor Martin Lennon.
Amendment.
Councillor Kenny McCready.
Motion.
Councillor David McLaughlin.
Motion.
Councillor Lynn Nealon.
Motion.
I understand that Councillor Nugent has returned to the meeting, but unfortunately wasn't here for the full item of business. Councillor Graham Scott.
Motion.
Councillor David Shearer.
Amendment.
Councillor Bert Thompson.
Motion.
Councillor Jim Mortaugh. Councillor Mortaugh.
Amendment.
Yep. Okay, 3 members have voted in favour of the amendment and 17 have voted in favour of the motion. I therefore declare the motion carried. Thank you.
Thank you, Stuart. Agenda item 8, application P21-1129, and that's in pages 121 to 136. And I'll ask Tina to take us through the item. Thank you, Tina.
Thank you, Chair. This is a planning application, a detailed application for the demolition of the existing buildings on this site at Stroud Road. It's the former Greenhill Sports Centre that is still situated on that site, and the proposal is to erect 20 flatted dwellings along with landscaping for the area. The site is located at the bottom of a sloped area of open space where Maple Terrace, a row of terrace dwellings, sits at the top of the slope to the north and the northwest of the site. The western boundary is also adjacent to the area of open space which leads towards Pine Court and Pine Crescent. Detailed planning consent is sought for the demolition of the sports centre itself and a storage building that's also on the site, and erecting the 28 flats within roughly an L-shaped block, which would be there would be 3 sections of and 4 stories in height. The proposed access to the site would remain as the current access and the proposed off Stroud Road, and the proposed parking and bin stores would be located to the rear of the main buildings. The site is to be developed by Merchant Homes Partnership Limited as affordable housing on behalf of Sanctuary Housing Association. In terms of policy, it's set out in section 3 of the report. Most of the site lies within the built-up area, although there is a small section of the site within green space. However, the site does still sit within open space, and a lot of that will remain. In terms of consultees, we've got no objections from any of the consultees as set out in section 4 of the report. Turning to representations, the application was advertised, and we do have 11 letters of objections from the nearest residential area and 1 letter of comments. And all of the points raised are set out in section 5 of the report. The main issues that I would highlight for members really focus on amenity issues, roads issues, and the loss of the facility itself. In terms of amenity, we've looked at this quite closely because it is a flatted block, but we've also looked at the distances involved between the block itself and the nearest residential properties at Maple Terrace. The distance is approximately 41 metres between the 2 areas, but there will be more than that, at least 50 metres in terms of the window-to-window distances between the flatted block and the existing dwellings. We have had sections, we've looked at sections where the new block, albeit that it's 4-storey in height, because it sits at the bottom of the slope, we've looked at the relationship with Maple Terrace, and roughly speaking, the ridge is coming in at roughly the ridge of the houses at the top of the slope, and given the standoff distances, that doesn't give us an issue. In terms of a residential guide, the window-to-window distance requirement minimum is 20 metres, so it's far in excess of that. In terms of disturbance and roads, I mean, in terms of the level of disturbance during construction, that is something that residents would experience, but there's nothing that wouldn't be a valid reason for refusal. We have consulted our roads colleagues and they're happy with the access to the site, and there's also sufficient parking that would be built in conjunction with the flats themselves. The other issues that are raised are set out and responded to in section 5 of the report. Just turning to our assessment and conclusion, the proposal is for affordable housing, therefore the principle of development is supported by the council. There would be no, as members will be aware, no separate contributions required because it is affordable housing. I've mentioned the detail of the difference in height, and although the proposed block will come in slightly higher than Maple Terrace, given the elevated position, the lower position of the block, we don't think it would raise any amenity issues, and also the standoff area. So therefore, we're recommending approval. At paragraph 6.10, we explain that the application was advertised development contrary to the development plan because there is a small section of the site designated as green space. But as I say, it will remain surrounded by open space. We don't think that impacts adversely on amenity. And for the reasons set out in 6.10, we would recommend approval.
Thank you, Tina. Any questions for Tina? Councillor Wardle.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with this building association. Normally when we get building association applications, we're talking about houses for social rent. In this case, we appear to be talking about, build for profit, the whole question of what is affordable and what isn't, that's a piece of string. But could you clarify, is this a build for profit? These flats will be for sale. And if they are for sale and is built for profit, why is there no community contribution required?
Through yourself, Chair. As far as I'm aware, it will be for rent because we've had discussions with our housing colleagues who have already had discussions with Sanctuary. So the nominations, the protocol that the council has with RSLs, registered social landlords, we've taken up with Sanctuary. So as I say, as far as I am aware, they will be for their social rented properties, through Sanctuary. The council will be involved in terms of our nomination process.
Thank you, Tina. Is that okay, Jim?
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay, thank you. Councillor McCann.
I certainly welcome the additional rented accommodation for the town, but I would highlight, and I know it's in the report, that there is substantial flooding at this location because the water cascades off that embankment going up towards Maple. And some people might not know, but it runs from Pine on the footpaths. I've been involved with roads and leisure services at one time. I mean, it causes substantial dampness in that building. So that needs to be sorted so that the houses don't get the substantial dampness. Thanks.
Thanks, Archie. I don't see any other hands. I'll move the report.
I'll second it, Chair.
Agree the report?
Agreed.
Thank you. Agenda item 9 is application P21-1183, and that's in pages 137 to 154. I'll ask Stephen to take us through the item. Thank you, Stephen.
Thank you again, Chair. Very quickly, I know time's moving on. This application is a further application as it relates to the substitution of house types, which is amending a previously consent issued CL 150445. You'll notice from the covering sheet that there's been 2 objection letters received and 1 comments letter. I would add that since this was produced, a further email was received yesterday just inquiring about progress of the application. They were advised it was being reported to committee today. So really there's now 2 comment letters for this application. Consultations undertaken with Roads and the West of Scotland Archaeological Service. And essentially this site has planning consent for housing. It's identified for housing in the local development plan. It's a large site, 7.6 hectares, and it consists of a variety of boiler houses, greenhouses, sheds, agricultural fields, quarters of a dwelling house and a restaurant and a car park. It's been a site assembly exercise by the applicant because there are various landowners involved. And essentially, the proposals or the applications with us because now they wish to change 125 of the house types of the 140 that were previously approved because one of the current owners of the land does not wish to complete the sale of their site to the developer. Essentially, the house footprints are the same as is previously approved, as are the number, the position of the open space, the roads, etc. And while we've received representations about it, it's primarily about the principle of it and the impact on amenity, both aspects which were considered when the original consent was issued for the application that was submitted in 2015. You'll notice that the Roads Department in their comments are generally okay with the proposal, simply again because it is a renewal of consent, and all they're really asking is that the same conditions be applied, and that's what is being recommended. West of Scotland Archaeological Association again are reiterating their comments, and these have been addressed by conditions. As I said earlier, the two representations objecting to the proposal are basically about overlooking loss of sunlight and amenity concerns, noise and disturbance from the kickbridge, and these aspects have been addressed satisfactorily in the layout. The final part of the report is essentially a summary of everything that's important here to assessment of it. The fact is the site has consent. The revisions are relatively insignificant, and the proposal is acceptable in terms of the applicable policies, and the recommendation is therefore to issue consent subject to the conditions listed. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen. Councillor Nealon?
Thank you, Chair. It's just one of the objections has caught my eye. It's J. It refers to there being no suitable safe walking route from the site to the local primary school. It does mention children being bused to school, which I know is not a planning matter, but can you just confirm that there is adequate pavement for children to access the local primary school should they wish to walk? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Nealon. I'll be have to ask Fraser to give me more input on that aspect, as my local knowledge. I have driven by the site, I know where the site is. My memory suggests that there obviously within the new development there will be provision of footways and footpaths according to current standards. As it comes on to Lanark Road, quickly, if you don't mind, have a look at the location plan, which I believe is page 154. To see whether there is that connection along the frontage of the site along Lanark Road, which is obviously a major classified road. And if you give me 2 seconds, please, Councillor Nealon. I'm just nearly at the map. Oh, let's just jump by. I've lost control of it just now, if you bear with me. I don't know if Fraser can help me out in this at the present time, because my computer has just given up on it, and I'm trying to get into the map.
Fraser, you come in at that point?
Yeah, certainly there is a condition on the recommendation that there would be a 2 metre wide footway along the frontage of the development. There is a footway. I'm just looking up Google Maps myself, actually. There's a footway on the opposite side of the road as well.
Thank you, Fraser.
Again, Councillor Nealon, sorry, Chair, I'd point out that the existing properties that there may have children, they will already go to school, but I do believe it has been, as Fraser correctly pointed out, by the condition, etc., and that should help.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Shearer?
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Nealon raises a valid point. However, any children going to Braidwood Primary would have to cross the Lanark Road, and that's a particularly busy road. Certainly, if I lived there with children, I'd be happy that they're being bused to the local primary rather than try and cross that busy road. However, that wasn't the issue I wanted to raise. That site has in the past had issues regarding sewage disposal. Now, I would hope that when any detailed planning permission comes forward, that we look very carefully at the sewage issue and it's dealt with appropriately. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Shearer, can I give you reassurance that within major developments like this, the number of units proposed Scottish Water obviously will be part and parcel of the development, and separate from the planning process, Scottish Water will need to get consent from, the applicant will need to get consent from Scottish Water for their sewage connections, for their water connections, so that aspect will be looked at.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Hose?
I'm actually a local resident in Braidwood, but further down Lower Braidwood. So I know the area very well. And we're going to go back to Lynn's point and also David's point that it's on the busy Lanark Road. There are pavements on either side, but crossing that road is very difficult. There is no pedestrian crossing. So even as an adult crossing there, where I cross the top of Braidwood across to the other side with the station, the hotels and stuff, very difficult and not suitable for children in any shape or form. And I'm assuming this housing development will have lots of children, and crossing that road, and also you can't bus people, it's only down the road, you can't, that's going against all our environmental plans, that we can't bus people, which literally will take children, 5 minutes tops from that location to the primary school. You can't bus them down there, it's ridiculous. So my point is that there needs to be a substantial pedestrian crossing in that area to allow children to cross. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Devlin?
Thanks, Chair. And it's actually just on the same theme as both have just mentioned. Knowing the difficulty is to try and get a pedestrian crossing in after a road has been established, and we keep getting told because there's no fatalities, therefore we can't get any we can't get any crossing. Can we put in the conditions in that there is a thing with controlled crossing so that the children do have access, given them board that we are trying to encourage children either to walk to school or to cycle to school? Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Hudson?
Yeah, sorry, it's just going on from that. I mean, regarding transport, it will be if there is not a safe walking route right to the school. So therefore, it's not just the crossing that would be considered as to whether school transport would be provided. So for wanting them to be able to walk, we need to ensure that there is a safe walking distance from the development site to the primary school, not just the crossing that needs to be addressed.
Thank you, Alec. Councillor Hamilton?
I was just wondering Alec's point as well, actually, what Alec was saying as well, actually, because I don't know, it's obviously not a safe walking route. Anyway, so I don't know whether a bus would be provided, because I know there's other places in our ward that it's maybe not the mile, but there's not a safe walking route. So I was just wondering, and also maybe clarification on, I don't think anybody on this call will know it, but whether it would be Braidwood Primary they would be going to, because I don't know if the catchment area would maybe be Crawford Dyke for that area, because there's not that much between them, and I know that there's other developments that maybe run in the line with that one that go to Crawford Dyke, not Braidwood. So I think there's maybe quite a few questions in terms of that, but I don't know if anybody in this call could answer it.
Thanks, Lindsay. I think you're right. I don't know if Paul and Elliot will be able to help us any.
I think I need Fraser, Chair. I mean, I think that the issue is that the principle of development and outline permissions already being granted for this site in 2016 don't have that in front of us. I should remember, because I do remember there was a bit of a stushy about it from the neighbouring residents, and the reason I remember it was heard at my very first planning committee when I took up my job here, so you think it'd be ever ingrained in my psyche. There are a number of roads conditions. It's whether or not we can add them in at this stage, because it's really just an amendment to the layout. So I'm going to ask Fraser if he can help me out as to what we can add at this stage, bearing in mind I don't have the original permission and there would have been conditions set down as part of that. Fraser?
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately I wasn't involved in the previous application, but I've seen the conditions that there is a proposal for the installation of a a traffic signalised junction on the A73. And that being the case, there may be a ability to get a controlled crossing point in. I'd need to look back to see what that actual proposal was. Again, I kind of looked at the change in house types on this one and viewed it as that. So you'd certainly find out.
Thank you, Fraser. Councillor Donnelly?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know the area, but I'm listening to the councillors for that area, in particular what Lindsay was saying. Is there any way we can answer her questions before we go forward? And that would be on the catchment area for the school. I think that's a very, very important question, because then that would answer our problem around crossing the road.
Thanks, Mary. Pauline, did you want to come back in?
Yeah, I'm just sensing members just quiet. I wonder if you would feel more comfortable deferring this application to the December committee in order to get more details about the safe routes to school and another transport matters. And that would kind of cut the debate short now, and we could come back with that detail for you, Chair. Thank you.
Well done.
Thanks, Pauline. That sounds like a plan. Okay, can we move deferral?
Yep.
Second that, Chair.
Thank you. Agreed, deferral.
Agreed.
Agreed.
Okay, thank you. Agenda item 10 is South Lanarkshire Local Development Plan 2, supporting planning guidance, carrying out development at dwelling house and electric vehicle charge points. And that's from pages 155 to 178. And Tony will speak to that one. Thank you, Tony.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So the purpose of this report is to seek approval for the proposed 7 SPGs that you've described there, Councillor Dorman. And if committee agree, thereafter carry out a 6-week consultation period on the documents. So members will be aware that the Planning Committee on the 1st of December last year gave approval to proceed to the adoption of the Council's Local Development Plan 2. And that was formalised in April this year. In that report to committee, it was highlighted that further detailed information, advice and guidance on specific topics to accompany the adopted plan would be produced in the form of what's called supporting planning guidance. The purpose of that is to support the policy approach already contained within the adopted plan, but it doesn't alter either the aims or the purposes of the policies in the plan. So, and also, while not part of the plan itself, adoption of the guidance by the Council gives it formal status and means it would be a material consideration in the determination of applications. So going forward, we've started work on supporting planning guidance on a number of topics, and the two before you today are the ones that we've promoted and prepared to this point. So the SPG on carrying out development at a dwelling house is based on and updates advice that was previously set out in the now superseded Development Management and Placemaking Supplementary Guidance. That fell with the adoption of the new local development plan in April. So the SPG before you, it sets out detailed guidance to homeowners proposing to extend or alter their house. It sets out key design principles which should be taken into account when planning a wide range of new house extensions and alterations. The guidance also covers proposals for using properties for work or for business purposes, and also includes an element of a reference to short-term lets as well. General advice is also given on associated issues such as recent changes to the permitted development rights, which determines whether or not you need planning permission for work or not, accessibility, flooding and drainage, road safety and building warrant regulations. The SPG on electric vehicle charging points, it's a new document. It's been prepared to provide up-to-date guidance on the emerging issue of the transition to low-emission vehicles to tackle climate change. So it's intended to assist developers with requirements in terms of the type and number of units that should be provided, and also the information that will be required to be submitted with planning applications. So the SPG contains advice on both residential and non-residential standards and includes disabled space provision and also accessible parking bays. This SPG will support the aims of the LDP2 to address climate change and support the use of electric vehicles by seeking their inclusion within new developments. And this in turn reflects the vision of the government's National transport strategy to reduce transport emissions. That includes a transition to electric vehicles by 2030, I think it is, which will contribute significantly to the government's goals. And the aim is to enable access to convenient and reliable charging infrastructure. It should be noted also that there's been recent consultation by the government on changes to the building regulations that will require new developments to provide charging infrastructure. And this SPG follows on from the direction that's been set by the government in that consultation. So it's recommended that the proposed SPGs set out in the appendices are approved. And following committee approval, it's intended to finalise the documents, and that would include the use of diagrams or photographs to demonstrate examples of good practice and also what to avoid. And thereafter, they will be published and made available for public consultation during January and February next year for a 6-week period. And following that public consultation, a report will then be produced summarising the comments received, our response, and any suggested changes to the SPGs. And this report will be considered at a future meeting of the Planning Committee.
Thank you, Tony. Councillor Alison.
Couple of points, Tony. The first one at 1.5, road safety. It highlights what would be considered a parking space and also the numbers required for houses. I seem to remember a lot of discussions at these meetings whether there is sufficient parking being provided, and regardless of whether it's electric vehicles or combustion engines, should we not be increasing the number of parking spaces available for 3 and 4 bedroom houses? Many houses today have a significant number of cars, and it does cause problems. The second point, I'm not sure if it's covered here, you can maybe advise me, is electric charging spaces out with the curtilage of a house. Is that part of this programme, Tony, or not? Because the issue I've got is people who are parking on these sites but not charging their car. And that is currently not illegal. Is that something that we should be in this to ensure that blocking these spaces don't happen? If it's not applicable here, sorry for bringing it up.
No problem, Councillor Alison. To answer your first point first, in terms of the number of spaces that's required, I suppose what we're looking at here is when a person extends the property, that might involve either increasing the number of bedrooms or taking away parking spaces because that's where the extension will be built, for example. So our desire is to make sure that there's enough parking provided to serve that dwelling house as extended or altered. The number of spaces that we've quoted here, they're from the Scots National Roads Development Guide, which are used by roads when they respond to consultation requests on planning applications. So it's a national guide, so that's where we are. It may be that over time that guide might change and FRIS might be able to advise on that, but that's what we're using as a guide at the moment. In terms of parking out with the curtilage of houses within electric vehicle parking bays, it's probably not a planning matter. I think you probably maybe think about new developments where we're asking for electric vehicle infrastructure to be provided on flatter developments, for example, or within commercial centres. All the planning process is interested in, if you like, is to make sure that those spaces are provided. How they're managed probably doesn't come within our remit, and that would be down to the developer to manage. Again, I don't know if there's anything in the national legislation, Fraser, that you could enforce in that kind of circumstance?
Excuse me. I think, as you say, Tony, these would be private developments, and it would be really down to the private body that would be maintaining that, whether that be a factor or whether the space would be allocated to the different residents. But certainly, my view is that it would be down to private to manage how they deal with that.
Okay, thank you. I still think, Tony, we should have more parking spaces for larger houses.
Councillor, as Tony says, the National Roads Development Guidelines is kind of what we base our requirements on. It's kind of been that way, I think even in the previous guidelines, these have just kind of continued through. It's certainly something we could look at in the future, but I'm not sure. It's very difficult sometimes to actually get the spaces on the street, and certainly from my experience of dealing with developers, you end up having a bit of a sea of car parking on the street and can detract as well. So there's other issues as well.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Watto?
Yeah, it was a query, on page 162 about, garages being parking spaces. As far as I'm aware, the policy of roads in terms of providing disabled access spaces was if you had a lock-up, you couldn't get a disabled space. Has that policy changed? Because in the cases I'm thinking about where there were disputes about having a lock-up and the lock-up being a parking space, I think the parking spaces were a bit smaller than the 7x3. Does that mean that now roads will have to change their policy on disabled parking bays as a result of having 7x3 metres as being a standard parking space and not smaller spaces, which is quite common in a lot of the lockups in East Kilbride?
Fraser, do you want to come in and answer that, please?
Yeah, Councillor Burtow, the 7x3 metre space is actually a very wide. It's a wide area. The 7 metres, a standard car will be around about 5.5, and my understanding of the 7x3 for a garage is that it will allow someone to park their car in a garage and still be able to use it for other purposes as well, and it makes it easy to use. It's a space that a car could fit in quite easily. I don't think that would mean there would need to be a change in terms of the disabled parking, and I'd need to look into that exactly, but I do recall that being the case. If you had a lock-up, then you had somewhere to park, and you wouldn't be able to get a disabled parking space. But this guidance is really for new properties, and it's to make sure that we don't get garages in the future that are essentially too narrow to practically fit your car into, because we do get applications in just now where the garage size is, you can put your car in the garage, but you might not be able to open the doors, and the 7x3 is to make sure that there's ample space to be able to use the garage and use it efficiently. So that's why it counted as one space, if that helps.
Supplementary?
Yes, go ahead, Jim.
Right. Yeah, I know what you're saying, but we're talking, what I'm talking about is a policy which roads have adopted, and it's caused a lot of problems where it was straightforward. If you had a lock-up, you couldn't get a disabled parking bay outside your house. Now, what I'm saying is it's that policy now got to change, because a lot of the lockups that I'm talking about didn't meet the 3 metres width, which would now not constitute a parking space. So will roads now be changing that policy in terms of disabled parking bays, to make sure that people will not be refused a disabled parking bay if the lockup they have doesn't meet the 7x3, which still begs the question: if you have parking bays and car parks, there's got to be a meter to allow people to open the door, because if you're disabled, you have to open the door a lot wider than normal. So will roads be re-looking at the policy they have adopted up until now, where it wasn't a case of the size of the lockup. If you had a lockup, you didn't get a disabled parking bay?
I'd be happy to take that one back, Councillor Watto, and look into that for you in terms of the disabled parking policy.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Fraser. Okay, I'll move the report.
I'll second that.
Thank you. Agree the report?
Agreed.
Agreed.
Thank you very much. And thank you all very much for your attendance today. I don't have any urgent business, so I'll just ask Stuart to stop recording and I'll close the meeting. Thank you and take care, everyone.